Hey everyone, I just want to kick this off by saying happy month anniversary. Woo! We got Hawk starting us off today. Gonna tell
Hello.
stories.
Just getting a few images for the story, and then I'll start telling them.
I hope everyone's got their popcorn because this is gonna be an awesome storytelling time.
I apologize for taking so long. All
Wow.
right. Was that you, Nacho?
Oh, there you are. Yep. Sorry, buddy. I'll mute myself.
All right. You got the images?
Yep, I got
All
them
right.
all. I'll try and be timely with them.
All right. So then I guess I am ready. Is everyone else ready?
Let's go.
All right. This first story is probably one of my favorites. It's about a woman named Karen Silkwood. She was a whistleblower who unfortunately died. And this is her story. Karen Silkwood was a 28-year-old woman working as a chemical technician at Kerr-McGee Cimarron Fuel Fabrication Site, a nuclear fuel production site in Crescent, Oklahoma. She was a member of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union. This story is about her death surrounded by strange circumstances. Karen was elected to the union's bargaining committee and then assigned to investigate safety issues at the Kerr-McGee production plant by the union. Upon beginning her investigation, she discovered several health and safety hazards and violations at the site, including improper training, contamination of workers, a lack of contamination showers, improper storing of samples, faulty respiratory equipment, faulty records, and even 40 pounds of missing plutonium. Ever since testifying to the Atomic Energy Commission in Washington, D.C., she was labeled a troublemaker, and was harassed as a result. On November 5th, while polishing plutonium pellets, the alpha detector was set off. The detector showed that her hands and arms were contaminated 40 times over the limit. Tests on the gloves showed that there were no leak and she was contaminated from the inside of the glove. Further radiation tests done on Karen at the Los Alamos National Laboratory showed acceptable levels of radiation. However, samples taken at Karen's home showed that her urine and feces were heavily contaminated. Other tests showed that plutonium had become embedded in her skin. The next day, her contamination level was much higher than before, despite her not working in several days. Her house was then inspected and was found to be completely contaminated, with hotspots being the toilet seat, bathroom floor, the fridge, and her bologna and cheese. As a result of contamination in her home, Kurt McGee accused her of stealing plutonium to frame them, although she attributed the contamination to her spilling a urine sample and later decided to make a bologna sandwich before deciding against it and putting the bologna back, which corresponded with the hotspots in her house. However, the soluble type of plutonium found in Silkwood's body came from a production area that she had not accessed in 4 months, and the pellets have since been stored in the facility's vault. Upon hearing the safety hazards and violations, Stephen Wadka, a union leader, set up a meeting with a New York Times reporter, David Burnham, at a hotel in Oklahoma City for November 13th at 8 p.m. But the meeting did not happen. On the way to the meeting, Karen Silkwood wrecked her car into a culvert, killing her. Her autopsy reported that up to 150 milligrams of Quaalude was in her system at the time of the wreck, and her wreck was ruled an accidental one car wreck as a result of her passing out from the Quaalude, and her death was ruled an accident. The union hired a private investigator who found that the steering wheel was severely bent, suggesting that she braced for impact. He also found skid marks on the road, indicating a struggle, and there was also a dent, chipped paint, and rubber from another vehicle on the rear end of the vehicle. It was later discovered that the lead detective wasn't even told about this information and hadn't even seen the vehicle. On top of the suggestion that the wreck was not an accident, there was also missing documents. There were reports of Karen having a manila folder with the documents that was bringing to the meeting. An officer found the documents on the ground outside of the car and claimed to have put them back into the car before it was towed, but they were nowhere to be found when family and friends investigated the vehicle. Strangely enough, two Kerr McGee employees who were managers reportedly arrived at the wreck before highway patrolmen and looked inside of the car. On top of this, the Atomic Energy Commission and Kerr-McGee officials had investigated the car at the police garage before Karen's family could. Following the death of Karen Silkwood, the Karen estate sued Kerr-McGee for negligence. The estate was awarded $10.5 million or over $40 million today. After an appeal, the award was lessened to just $5,000. Although in 1984, the Supreme Court reversed the appeal and Kerr-McGee settled out of court for $1.38 million or 3.7 today. After her death, the FBI, Atomic Energy Commission, and Kerr-McGee discredited Karen Silkwood. Kerr-McGee refused to admit fault. It is still and probably will forever remain a mystery as to whether or not Karen Silkwood died as a result of foul play. Many people today believe she was murdered, while few believe it was an accident. That was the first story. I think that she was murdered. I'm going to be honest. It seemed like the FBI and AEC was covering a lot up. It also happened in my home state of Oklahoma, which is also pretty sad. You guys ready for the next story as well? This next story is about Hugh Glass. This story is of Hugh Glass, a man who survived a bear attack. A story so famous that it inspired a movie, The Revenant. In 1822, Hugh Glass joined an expedition of 100 fur traders called Ashley's 100, led by General William Henry Ashley. They were hired to ascend the Missouri River. When they reached Fort Kiowa in South Dakota, where they split up, Hugh Glass, along with many others, headed west towards the Yellowstone River. During a hunting expedition, he got separated from his group when he came across a grizzly bear with 2 cubs. The bear, defending her children, attacked him, puncturing his throat, breaking his leg, ripping at his scalp, tearing into his skin, and leaving cuts on his back that exposed ribs. Glass, along with some of his partners, Bridger and Fitzgerald, fought and managed to kill the angry mama bear, but Hugh was severely injured. Henry, who was convinced Glass would not survive, asked for 2 volunteers to stay by Hugh until he died, and then to bury him. Bridger and Fitzgerald, who were allegedly paid $80 to stay with him, agreed and began digging his grave. Although the men believed he would die in just hours, Glass survived for 5 days. Afraid that they would be attacked by the Arikaras, which are a group of natives they had had prior fights with, and believing that he would die, they left Glass to die alone. They took all his equipment and left nothing but a bear hide to keep him warm, and falsely reported to Henry that he had died. When he came to and realized he had been abandoned and left with nothing and with severely infected wounds, he set his broken leg. He did his best to tend to his injuries, including letting maggots eat dead flesh on his back. He started crawling towards the nearest settlement, Fort Kiowa, which was more than 200 miles away. Being unable to hunt as a result of being injured and having no gear, Glass had to survive on insects, berries, fruits on this crawling trek. He eventually met a friendly tribe, the Lakota tribe, who helped him. He bargained himself onto a skin boat, which, of course, made the trip much faster and easier. At the Cheyenne River, he made a raft and to float down the river, and he used the Thunder Butte as navigation. Along the way, another tribe gave him food, weapons, and sewed a bear hide to his back to prevent further infection. He then set back off to reach Fort Kiowa. After a long recuperation of several years, he left the settlement to find and kill the 2 men who abandoned him, Bridger and Fitzgerald. He found Bridger near a mouth of Bighorn River of Yellowstone, but spared him because he was only 19. Glass then traveled to Nebraska to find Fitzgerald. When he found him, he spared him because he was in the army and killing a soldier was punishable by death, but warned him that if he ever left, he would kill him. And Fitzgerald never left the military. I think my favorite part of that story is the fact that he crawled so long for weeks. All right, this next story is it's the longest, and it's also my second favorite one. It's also a little bit sad. I'm going to be honest, I did shed a tear whenever I was writing the script for this one, so I don't know if you guys will, but it is quite sad to hear. This one's about Carl McCunn. Carl McCunn was an American wildlife photographer born in 1946 who had spent 5 months surviving on an Alaskan mountain range called the Brooks Range in 1976. In March of 1981, McCunn hired a bush pilot to fly him out to a remote, unnamed lake 225 miles northeast of Fairbanks, Alaska. He planned on photographing the Alaskan tundran wildlife for 5 months. He expected the pilot to pick him up in August, but apparently he never confirmed this. He flew in with 500 rolls of film, 1,400 pounds of provisions, 2 rifles, and a shotgun. Carl, believing he wouldn't need them, emptied 5 boxes of shotgun shells into the river near his camp. In his diary, he wrote, "Had 5 boxes, and when I kept seeing them sitting there, I felt rather silly for having brought so many. Felt like a warmonger, so I threw all away." And later wrote, "Who would have known I might need them just to keep from starving?" When August came and the plane had not arrived, he wrote in his diary, "I think I should have used more foresight about arranging my departure. I'll soon find out." As apparently the pilot had told him to not count on his help as he might be working in Anchorage in the summer. And according to the pilot, Carl had given him money to fly into, but not out of, the remote site. By mid-August, Carl realized that the pilot was not going to return for him. It was at this point that he had started to make his provisions last longer. He shot local game such as ducks and muskrat and tried drying the meat from a drowned caribou he watched die. McCunn was hopeful that his friends and family would send someone to look for him after being gone for so long. He sent out 3 maps with his campsite location marked to friends and his dad, but he was not clear about his exact itinerary. In his diary, he wrote, "Certainly someone in town should have figured something must be wrong, me not being back by now. But then again, there's probably no one in town who gives a... Who in the hell do those people think I gave them maps for? Decoration?" Although his father knew where he would be, he was unaware of when he would be returning. On top of this, Carl had told his father not to be concerned if he didn't return at the end of the summer, as on a prior trip his father called the police when he stayed longer than he had originally planned and asked him not to do that again. Many of his friends that were not concerned had apparently believed that he had already returned and was working in Paxson. However, some of his friends were concerned and asked Alaska state troopers to check on him. State troopers then flew overhead and observed him waving a red flag in a casual manner. Another time, a trooper flew over but didn't believe he was in distress as he was waving an orange sleeping bag very casually, and then on their third pass he had observed Carl walking back to his tent. In his diary, Carl wrote about one of the plane sightings. "Unfortunately, it was on wheels and couldn't land, so I stopped waving after its first pass. I then got busy packing things up and getting ready to break camp. As sunset approached, I began to doubt if the pilot took me seriously. I certainly hope he didn't think that my having stopped waving meant that I thought he might be someone else at first or something." Carl later wrote, "I recall raising my right hand shoulder high and shaking my fist to the plane's second pass. It was a little cheer, like when your team scored a touchdown or something. Turns out that the signal for all okay, do not wait. It's certainly my fault I'm here now. Man, I can't believe it. I really feel like a klutz. Now I know why no one's shown up from that incident." Afterwards, he found a small cache of supplies of snares and bits of candles while digging a shallow trench to prepare for winter. According to Alaska State Trooper that helped McCunn mark his campsite on a map, Carl was aware of a cabin located 5 miles from his camp, and it's unknown why he didn't use the cabin when the weather inevitably became colder. When snow fell and the lake froze over, game became scarce. He set traps for rabbits, but they were often raided by wolves and foxes. It's been a terrible day for me and I won't go into it. Hands getting more frostbitten every day. Have only 1 meal of beans left. Honestly, I'm scared for my life, but I won't give up. By November, Carl had completely run out of food. He considered walking to Fort Yukon, which was 75 miles away, but he was unable to due to snow and his weakened condition. At some point, McCunn wrote in his diary, I'm frightened my end is near. Things get too miserable, I've always got a bullet around. Think I'm too chicken for that. Besides, that may be the only sin I've never committed. By Thanksgiving, he wrote of having dizzy spells and almost constant chills. Carl used the last of his fuel supplies to start a fire to keep him warm. He then wrote a letter to his father instructing him on how to develop his skin. He also requested that his personal belongings be given to his father and also suggested that whoever find him take his rifle and shotgun for their trouble. I'm burning the last of my emergency Coleman light and just fed the fire the last of my split wood. When the ashes cool, I'll be cooling with them. I chickened out once already, but I don't want to go through the chills again. They say it doesn't hurt. If my body is ever eaten on, or if it turns out I take my own life, just put me under a tree so I can at least make a decent meal for some critter. I don't want my family to see me that way. They'll be hurt enough as it is. Should I crazily attempt to walk out in my condition and nowhere to be found, please carry out the above will. I kindly thank whoever may do so. The idea is me, naturally. Just before his death, Carl wrote in his diary, "They say it doesn't hurt." He then wrote one last note, reading, "Dear God in heaven, please forgive me, my weakness, and my sins. Please look over my family." He pinned his Alaska driver's license to the note and shot himself with his rifle. By January of 1982, McCunn's friends became concerned enough to request authorities search for him. On February 2nd, a month and a half after his death, a ski-equipped plane carrying several Alaska State Troopers landed at his campsite to check on his camp. They found his zip tent. After cutting it open, they found Carl's corpse emaciated and frozen, along with his 100-page diary. Excerpts from Carl's diary were published in December of 1982 by the San Antonio Light. In an interview with the Light, Donovan McCunn, Carl's father, said, "If anything comes of his death, it will be to caution people not to get in the same circumstances. If only we could keep one person from going through what that kid went through," he said. In Carl's diary, he identified Rory Cruikshank as the pilot and expected to pick him up. A coroner's inquest absolved Cruikshank of any responsibility after several witnesses testified that there was no specific arrangement of pickup. And McCunn wrote that Cruikshank told him to not rely on his help as he may be in Anchorage working. The coroner ruled Carl's death as a suicide.